I previously went over all my favorite Mavericks per Mega Man X game, so the natural sequel to that would be my least favorites. I even typed up a script for it months ago, but since that video would be much more negative, I kinda wanted to avoid it, and I told myself I would only actually record it if a Sunday came about where I absolutely didn't have anything else. Well, I just want to say that's not what happened. I have about 2.5 other things already typed out, the one I just wanted to do another playthrough of a game to confirm my thoughts on it, and the rest, I just want to give some room to breathe. I just want everyone to acknowledge that I'm very brave and full of integrity, though admittedly, I might have been able to get something else done if I wasn't so wrapped up in Fire Emblem at the moment. So now that I've wasted enough time making excuses and fishing for sympathy before potentially cheesing some folks off, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I'm ready to tell you why I think your favorite bosses from the X series are trash. Or at least the weakest link in their game. I have a lot of love for the original Mega Man X, but I guess even that runs dry at some point. Sting Chameleon is just kind of okay for me. Maybe it's because I almost always fight him last, so a bit of my enthusiasm is already spent. Maybe the other boss designs just overshadow him that much. After all, while I know he's a chameleon, I see his ridged head, at first glance, it'd be easy to confuse him for just a generic lizard, and that doesn't make as much of an impact on me as, say, a stag, beetle, or octopus. And while his weapon charged up is pretty great, the standard chameleon sting doesn't really do anything special that another power couldn't cover better. But wait, originally I was gonna just talk about the boss fights themselves, and I haven't even talked about his encounter. Okay, I think I can come up with something. He has a spiked ceiling that's an insta-kill, sometimes his weakness just arcs around him, you have to wait for him to stop being invisible to be able to hit him. Oh, he's such a meanie. I think this is my brother's favorite boss too, I think more than any other boss on this list, other than maybe one special category, Wheel Gator from X2 does the most to earn my ire. I swear, I spend over half my time in his boss room just waiting for the guy to stop hiding and actually fight me. The floor of the room is covered with blood, oil, black cherry Kool-Aid? The exact contents don't matter, what does is that Gator spends a lot of time beneath the surface of whatever it is. You have to wait for him to show his face again, and sometimes when he does, he barely sticks around. It also gets a bit awkward when you factor in his animations, because he doesn't actually need to hide to be invincible, he just needs to think about it. There's been multiple times when I've hit him when he's still above surface, but because he hunched up his shoulders in preparation for diving, that counted as him being off the playing field. And hey, if you ever think that he's being a bit too generous with how often he's opening himself up, you can just hit him with his weakness, the strike chain, and he'll immediately go under. So much for the right weapon giving you an advantage. Honestly, I just get really bored fighting Wheel Gator. I wouldn't call him hard, the main thing he tests is your patience. I should probably try to find a speed run that shows some way to cheese him, though even if there is a way, I still think he's left enough of a bad taste in my mouth that I'd still hate him. I really like Neon Tiger from X3 from a design standpoint. I already liked tigers as an animal, and then they made a Maverick out of one and slapped laser claws on him. It just seems unnecessary and silly, but a kind of silly I'm fond of, so I'm here for it. Actually fighting him though can be a bit annoying. I think he's typically considered one of the harder bosses. While his somewhat spammy projectiles and the way he bounces off the walls can be a little overwhelming when you first fight him, they're actually fairly predictable once you get used to them. What annoys me is how he can block your shots. He just kind of does it. He raises his arm up and your shots bounce off. And it's pretty much instant. He doesn't even need to have the arm fully raised for it to work. There have been several times when I've timed my shot to try and hit him right when he landed or when he was wrapping up an attack, and it be ineffective, it looking like he blocked it after my strike already connected. The dude just kinda feels unfair at points. In addition to that, he also has a super move where he glows, charges at you, and then leaps up. He's invincible when he does it, so all you can do is dodge, and I'm really not sure what triggers it. At first, I thought it came after a successful block, but no, he did it even when I was biding my time, so it might just be random. I've seen him do it multiple times in a row too, so if the RNG gods aren't on your side, you could just be left running around, waiting for it to be your turn to attack again. I don't have any major gripes with X4's roster, but I have to pick someone, so let's go with Frost Walrus. He's a pretty easy boss, as long as you know how to dash off the walls, and while I don't mind there being a gimme in a game's lineup, at the same time, the mid-boss in his stage always gives me a lot more trouble than he does, which is really lame. Plus, and maybe this is just me, but using his weakness on him seems actively detrimental. Hit him with fire, it melts his tusk, and it slows down his slide attack significantly. You also can't melt him again until he reaches the other side of the screen and refreezes himself, so all using the supposedly optimal weapon seems to do is make his fight take longer. Like I said, he's pretty easy to take down, so a weakness isn't really required, but I still do find this annoying. On the character himself, from what I've read, he sounds like a real jerk. Despite being a pushover, he's described as being arrogant and violent. The plot seems to make you want to sympathize with Repliforce, but members like Walrus totally ruin that. His presence makes the writing seem more clumsy than poignant. In X5, Tidal Whale is just kind of a dumb boss fight. He starts off doing very little to menace you, just sending out slow-moving ice blocks your way that are easy to get around. It's open season on the guy until you eliminate the bulk of his health and he moves to the other side of the screen. At that point, the blocks start coming fast, still not hurting you but instead pushing you back into the spiked wall, which, as you'd probably figure, is an insta-kill. It's like they couldn't figure out a middle ground for this guy, you either engaging in a brain-dead fight that players of any skill level can pass without damage, or a race to the finish where one dumb mistake will lead to your immediate death. I do not understand Ground Scarovic from X6. He comes out, rolling a poop, you jump over him and shoot him in the back. He then comes out with a bigger poop, and you do the same thing. And that's pretty much it. Sure, it can get a little tricky to hop over some of his bigger turds, but for the most part, there doesn't seem to be anything to this fight and it feels like I'm missing something. Am I killing him too fast for him to do something interesting? Is that really all he does? Or has he used other attacks, if we can call them that, on me and they were just so lackluster that I can't remember them? It's all well and good to have a gimme boss to get new players started, but he's just so boring. At least Toadman entertained by wiggling his belly. The fact that Scarovic's level requires RNG to get power-ups certainly doesn't earn him any bonus points. For X7, it's surprisingly Snipe Anteater. A few bosses in this game will attack you before you even have a chance to dodge, and this guy kinda does that. Starting the battle out of sight, he hits you with the ranged attack that takes up a decent bit of space, and if you aren't familiar with the fight, will almost certainly hit you. The encounter takes place on top of a cylinder, him having full range of it while you only having around the top half. He can spend extended periods of time on the bottom, making it so that only ranged attacks will work, and only if you can manage to get a good angle. He can also send out ant mines, which are more annoying than problematic, since trying to find the right position to attack is already tricky without you needing to watch your steps. He can fire homing missiles, which home, track you for longer than you'd expect, and can be rough in conjunction with the ant mines. He can also send out floating bits, several at once, that will take pot shots at you and you can't seem to lock onto them, so you're pretty much stuck with them until someone dies, making it a race against the clock. All of this is especially rough if you're using Zero, his sword being mostly useless for a good bit of the fight, and with the way Anteater slides about and turns around, he can easily just run into Zero when he tries to get close enough to strike. For X8, it's Gigavolt Manowar. While I was trying to avoid bringing up the boss's stages, with Gigavolt, he's an exception since he features prominently in it. The boss battle itself is perfectly fine. Not too easy, not too hard, no major instances of bullcrap, but to get to it, you have to chase the guy around the city, flanking him before you complete 2 laps. You're on a ride chaser, for what I guess is technically an on-rail shooter, and the rails are incredibly vague. There are signs and bombs that you have to avoid, only where you think you're going will suddenly change as the screen's focus shifts, and it makes it near impossible to reliably weave around obstacles unless you have the course memorized. In addition to that, getting hit also slows you down, making it easy for Gigavolt to pull ahead. You can use a speed boost by expending some weapon energy, so the stage gets significantly harder if you don't come prepared with a longer ammo bar. In a game with a few rough levels, this is easily my least favorite, making the guy taunting you for the whole thing my most hated. When it comes to intro bosses, the Scorpion Mechanaloid from X7 is bottom of the barrel. At the start of the fight, when Zero has to just run from it, it immediately attacks him before he can do jack diddly. When you actually fight it, things feel very inconsistent. Sometimes attacks land, sometimes they're blocked, sometimes they just don't hit, and normally I clear this one by just kind of facing the boss and mashing until one of us dies. Add in X7's clunky controls, and calling this one unpleasant would be the nice way to put things. For story bosses, my pick is Hymax, though his master Gade isn't far behind. He's got a cool design and good music, but the fight itself is just really irritating. First you hit him with a charge shot, then a special weapon when he's stunned to do some actual damage, and vice versa with Zero. I don't hate it conceptually, but in practice, it really draws things out. Not only that, but when you initially face him in the intro stage, the game makes a point of hammering into your head that your buster is useless, giving you a boss whose method of defeat is so obtuse that to win, you need to either stumble onto the solution, look up a walkthrough, or just not and give up instead. On top of that, he generates shields in your final confrontation to add more steps to the fight, and if you take them down, he is very likely to just immediately regenerate them because wasting your time and making everything you do feel futile seems to be his thing. And you can just use the shadow armor to completely wreck the guy if you've unlocked it, but the rest of the stage after him is impassable, so you get to SD into a game over and do the whole thing again. Nearly every aspect of this guy seems designed to be irritating. The worst Sigma fight is from X7. That'll probably be enough for most people, but let me explain anyway. He has two forms, both looking like they're a part of a Mega Man line of children's toys, rather than belonging to the actual games. You know, like those Batman ones from the 90s, which gave him a bunch of bizarre costumes that never showed up in any official media. The first one has some big, plastic-looking guns. He swaps between the background and the foreground to take shots at you, oftentimes blocking when he's up front and giving you a brief window to try to get an actual lock-on to work on him before he attacks from further back. Given the very limited attack windows, this fight can get really drawn out, especially if you haven't played the game much, which most people won't, since the game's not worth doing multiple runs of. For the second form, he turns into a giant, dumb-looking action figure floating in space. You yourself have a semicircle of debris to hop around between, which is pretty awkward, though I wouldn't call it quite hard. A lot of times, Sigma stays out of range, so you're just stuck meandering around, waiting for a chance to strike. He has a lot of health, so this is another drawn-out one. And since your floor space is limited, if you make a dumb mistake and fall, you start the whole long process over again. He even has an attack where he leaps forward to quickly punch you, which can not only do a ton of damage, but can also knock you off the platform you're on, if you're positioned unfortunately. So he can get off an insta-kill. To say he's a headache in this one is an understatement. For X Command Mission, I hate Bodos. This guy frickin' sucks, and in a way only an RPG boss can. He comes at the very end of a level where you have to wander around a desert, a sandstorm obscuring your vision, followed by a labyrinth, the enemies of both stacking status effects on you that, if you fix, will just be immediately reapplied. So by the time I get around to fighting Bodos, I'm already frustrated, annoyed, and tired, and just wanting the chapter to be over. Then you get to this guy, who's the hardest boss in the game, other than the super secret post-game encounter that relies entirely on RNG, though in Bodo's case, his fight is only slightly after the halfway point. And he is rough, so rough. He has a few attacks, but for the most part, he just does status effects and can take a lot of damage, as well as constantly summon 2 bits to support him. These things move fast, sometimes going twice each before you get a turn, and in addition to their pretty okay attacks, they also have a move that heals a target for 25% of their HP. Now, I hate to throw a math word problem at you, but does anyone want to tell me what all these factors can potentially mean? That's right, if you get unlucky, the boss can get healed completely in between your turns. I think the most I ever saw was 2 of these in a row, but that's still a significant chunk of health for you to have to whittle down again, and I would not put it past this game to do 4 in rare occasions. And to top it all off, once you actually take him down, he makes a big, theatric production, complete with bad acting, about how tough you are, implying that he let you win to further his own agenda. One of your party members even makes a comment about the fight being too easy, further driving the point home. I like Command Mission, but sweet Christmas, stuff like this makes it hard to recommend. So those are my least favorite bosses by game. If you wanted to put together a roster that would make my time a living hell, choose these guys while maybe throwing in the Shadow Devil for a Sigma boss stage, but this time with even more health. The most common factor for my choices seem to be those that have really drawn out fights, so it seems that patience is my weakness. To be fair though, if you can go into a fight guns blazing, or have to wait several seconds for the perfect moment to strike, and both methods seem to do the same amount of damage per hit, which kind sounds more fun? Those are just my preferences though. What about you? Are there any bosses from the X series that really get under your skin, or do you think that all of them have impeccable designs and all my whining is just proof that I suck at these games? And how many people have I ticked off by throwing some of their favorites on my list? Kinda curious to the like-dislike ratio on this one, but this was originally supposed to be a punishment anyway, so I brought it on myself. But hey, if you managed to actually get through this one, I appreciate you watching. I post largely Mega Man content here, so maybe consider subscribing if you enjoy that sort of thing, and hopefully next week's video might be a little more positive.